I was running my players through the Sawwind Vale, which is my own Halloween-themed campaign setting. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter, there's a link down in the dungeon. I'm going to be creating a zine called Mugwort that highlights different areas of this campaign setting, so make sure you sign up. So in this short series of adventures, which is lauded by one of my players as their favorite ever, there is a recap of this short series of adventures that I'll link somewhere up here. Now, this was not memorable because they won, and definitely not because it was balanced. Because through the short series of 4 adventures, all the players realized that their characters were vastly outnumbered and outpowered. Now, the tension and the drama and the players actually being invested in the adventure makes this sort of thing possible. Part of it has to do with connecting the characters to the story that is going on, describing things vividly but not going over the top with long diatribes of text. Things like describing torchlight flickering off cave walls, something huge moves in the darkness, supernatural events that can cause panic, desperate plans, PCs dying or almost dying, and escape by the skin of their teeth. And to be honest, there was a time when I didn't run adventures like this, let alone encounters. Now, I started playing back in the 80s, but when I picked up 5th edition D&D, there was a shift. A style of play that echoed the past, but was not exactly that. So as I was running 5th edition and those sorts of games, everything was about balance, making sure that the CR rating wasn't outmatched for the player party. So everything was balance, 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 because that is what 5th edition was telling me to do. I thought that was my main job for encounters as a dungeon master. I thought that fairness created fun. Boy, was I wrong. I eventually realized something that was perhaps uncomfortable. The more balanced my encounters were, the less my players feared the world. And when fear exited the building, so did creativity and investment. This helped me to return to a playstyle that earlier D&D actually had down. I had actually trained my players to think that every encounter was winnable. In fact, I've had pretty heated discussions with my players where they would argue from a video game mindset that if it's right before them, that they should be able to win. Little did they know that in my mind, that retreat was a very viable option because they could be at first level and shown an ancient red dragon. I wanted to make clear to my players that the world is dangerous. And just because a monster comes along your path does not mean that you have a chance to defeat it. This isn't a video game. Nothing in my world is balanced. Different power level of creatures exist in my world, from the goblin to the ancient red dragon. So you better be careful or roll up new characters. I've talked about it before, where characters kick in every door, charge monsters immediately, assume combat is mandatory, they never scout, and they never retreat. And the truth is, this guy taught them that by how I was running the game, because every encounter was secretly calibrated. And then the players subconsciously knew that the world scaled around them. What happened? Danger became cosmetic. Sure, the monsters looked terrifying, but the players knew that the math was protecting them. But the second that the characters come across something that they genuinely cannot overpower, there's a total shift, and that is where excitement lives. Players will play their characters different when survival is uncertain. What do? Instead of kicking down every dungeon door and chasing after every single monster, they do this instead. Listen at doors, hire allies and henchmen, gather rumors, bribe monsters, set traps, and avoid combat entirely. The game stops being about the ability of the character and what's on their character sheet and starts becoming about human ingenuity. They're not looking at their character sheet, they're asking the dungeon master, What do I see? What's in the room? What's the atmosphere like? Can I hear anything? As a dungeon master, you might up your description game. Talk about the nuances of maybe the collapsed tunnel, oil that's on the staircase, signs of an ambush. The greatest tabletop moments happen when the players are not in control. They take a risk. They take a chance. Calculated because you've described it, but they take risks. And they'll do this when they feel desperate or when they're improvising and when victory feels impossible. This tension and this drama, that's what I want at my table. You don't have to want it, but I do. And if you do, continue to watch. Nobody remembers Fair Encounter number 32, but people remember surviving impossible odds, such as escaping the pumpkin monstrosity, holding the bridge, the last torch going out, the clerics sacrificing themselves, fleeing through collapsing ruins. Balanced encounters will create successful combat. Unbalanced encounters will create stories that you want to tell over and over. There was a time when I thought that my job as a dungeon master was protecting the campaign from failure. But failure is where the retellable stories come from. The scars they sustain, the rivalries they make, the reoccurring villains, the humiliating defeats and retreats, leading to revenge arcs. The villain that beats up the party once is way more memorable than the villain that the PCs just plow right over. There's a reason that Ravenloft is such a beloved adventure. Strahd takes a few hits, maybe messes up the party a little bit, but then retreats. There's never going to be a final battle in the first few rooms of that castle. I mean, I guess you could do it, but that's not how it's designed. There's supposed to be a narrative build-up, and it's a great example of how you should run most of your games. And if you haven't played it, you should. Telegraph danger clearly. Unbalance should never mean random. A few examples. They see giant footprints in the mud that are larger than their shields. They encounter a terrified or murdered NPC. They come upon a ritual site. Townsfolk are circulating stories and rumors. The goal is not to ambush players with death. The goal is to allow them to choose how they will deal with danger. Then allow the dice, or story stones, to fall where they may. They are part of the storytelling process. Monsters in AD&D and BXD&D and earlier iterations of the game have morale. The only morale that the players have for their characters is how you're describing something to them. You need to learn to paint pictures with your word, clear enough so that the players can make decisions for their characters. And you do this with lots and lots of built-up pressure. Start with the small and then escalate. Surrender or retreat should always be on the table. Give them clear outs. Maybe they're in a desperate battle and all the enemies start to flank the party. By doing so, they open up a path to retreat, or at least to start a chase. So retreat, chase scenes, negotiations, they should all be on the table. And don't forget monsters that have other goals besides just killing the player characters. If players can't retreat, then every encounter becomes mandatory. That's not choice. You want to give choice. There should typically, maybe not all the time, but there should be typically a way out. Mandatory combat can oftentimes stifle creativity, so mandatory combat should be used sparingly, maybe with the final boss. Paint pictures with your words. Describe the terrain, weather, darkness, traps, politics, factions, myth. The environment should be a part of the encounter, not just the backdrop. There shouldn't be any prose or expositions here, but tie the lore of your world into the scenery, into the relief carvings, and even in the small conversations in the tavern. Let me be clear. Failure doesn't always need to mean death. Let me say it again. failure doesn't need to mean death for the characters. Though it can, there's other things that can happen. The players could be captured, corrupted, lose resources, near and dear NPC deaths around them, enemies advancing their plans, towns they love fall to ruin. The campaign should continue to be reshaped even when the characters fail. After playing 5e for a while and being very story-centric, I found it hard to allow my players to just be players, to be able to make their own choices that didn't have to do specifically with the story I was trying to create. I thought balance created fairness in combat. It doesn't. Real fairness is giving players meaningful choices for their characters. And meaningful choices only exist when failure is possible. When I stop protecting the characters from the world, the players automatically started to become more invested in the world. The encounters that my players remember most are not fair. They're not balanced. They're terrifying. And they're messy. They teeter on falling apart as a baseline. But all of that messiness, all of that chaos, those are the moments that become legend at the table. The hag should feel ancient. The vampire should feel unstoppable. The abandoned castle should feel dangerous. And when the players, vicariously living through their characters, survive the impossible, they'll remember it for years. And you've just upped your game. Not because the fight was balanced, but because it felt real. I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for making this video possible. Without you, I don't exist, man. So thank you. And if you'd like to become a Patreon member, there's links down in the dungeon. All right, everyone. Thanks for stopping by Agranak Studios today, and we'll see you on the next one. Later!